Hello and welcome back to the channel. House of the Dragon Season 2 is just around the corner, so I thought I'd do a video on 8 things that we can expect to happen in the next upcoming season of the show. Before I get started, however, I do want to issue a big, fat spoiler warning, as I will be delving into the source material, Fire and Blood, and covering events that will happen in one way or another in this series, so if you don't want any spoilers, please click off this video sooner rather than later. Right, you've been warned. Let's get into the good stuff.
There has never lived a Stark who forgot an oath.
At the end of Season 1, Rhaenyra sends her 2 sons, Luke and Jace, off to various different houses in Westeros in an attempt to broker alliances for Team Black. We all know that Lucerys heads over to Storm's End to try and treat with Lord Boris Baratheon, however, that doesn't exactly end well. But where does Jace go? Now, in Fire and Blood, Jace first heads to the Eyrie to treat with Lady Jane, Arryn, to gather support from the Vale for Team Black, which he will find is successful so long as Team Black provides a Dragon Rider to basically protect the Vale from Team Green, and to be honest, don't blame them because Aemond and Vhagar do look quite intimidating. After treating with Lady Jane Arryn, he then heads north to treat with Lord Cregan Stark to gain support of the northern houses against Team Green, which he will find is successful, as we all know. House Stark never forgets an oath. There are also a couple of theories in Fire and Blood regarding the events at Winterfell that may take fruition. One of which suggests that Jace's dragon Vermax lays a clutch of eggs in the crypts of Winterfell. Another suggests that Jace falls in love with the bastard half-sister of Cregan Stark, Sarah Snow, and marries her. And the third of which suggests that Jace was trying to convert Cregan to the Faith of the Seven. I don't think it takes much to realise which one was written by an account of a Septon.
There is more than one way to fight a war.
This is probably the most shocking thing we will see this season, so I will provide a slight trigger warning, although I'm sure if you've gotten this far, you know the deal with the Song of Ice and Fire content. So, what is Blood and Cheese? Well, it's essentially Team Black's response to the death of Lucerys, and can be pretty much summarised as a son for a son. Following the death of Lucerys, Daemon then sends word to Mysaria in King's Landing, who recruits 2 assailants, known only as Blood and Cheese, Blood being a former member of the City Watch, and Cheese being a rat catcher. The 2 assailants are then given the knowledge that every evening Queen Helena brings her children up to the Tower of the Hand to see their grandmother, the former Queen Alicent. Now, they will use this to their advantage, as the Tower of the Hand is significantly less fortified, and Cheese can navigate the secret passageways that he learned as a rat catcher to essentially get inside Alicent's chambers. Now, this is where it gets a bit dark. Blood and Cheese will use Cheese's knowledge of the secret passageways to sneak into Alicent's chambers in the Tower of the Hand. They will bound and gag Alicent, making her unable to speak or move and do anything to protect her daughter. Helena then arrives later with her children. Blood then kills both of Helena's guards and forces Helena to choose a child to kill, basically in a way of saying one of theirs dies to avenge Lucerys' death. They make her choose, which is just in another dimension of messed up. And Helena naturally doesn't want to choose to kill one of her children and begs for mercy. However, both of them threaten they will kill them all if Helena doesn't pick. So Helena does end up picking her youngest child, Maelor, in a hope that he just won't remember, he's young, it's fine. However, it's then when Blood and Cheese will then Cheese then turns to Maelor and goes, "You hear that? Your mum wants you dead." And then they chop off the head of her eldest son, the heir, essentially the heir to the 7 Kingdoms after Aegon, and just kill him, take his head off, and run. And this, naturally, Helena just screams and screams, and this just starts to spiral into madness. Those events are obviously incredibly dark, and there's a reason why I regard Blood and Cheese as one of the most shocking moments that we will see this season. However, the particular bit that I'm most interested by is the instruction that Daemon's going to give off to King's Landing. Now, in the book, in my opinion, those instructions are left deliberately vague. We know exactly what happens as the outcome of those instructions, but we don't know the instructions themselves. And I think in the show, they're going to take the direction that it's going to be Mysaria that adds a lot of the kind of depravity and kind of darkness around Blood and Cheese, simply because at the end of Season 1, there was a lot of emphasis given on her disdain and disgust for what Aegon had been doing, and especially after she gave Aegon back over to Otto Hightower. Otto then went, presumably Otto then went and burned down her premises in King's Landing, or in Flea Bottom specifically. And I think a lot of this is going to be she'll use a lot of her kind of hatred towards them and almost in retaliation for what they've done against her to further justify the events of Blood and Cheese. And that as well, in a lot of promotional material recently, there was a character poster with Mysaria in it, and she was holding a traditional mousetrap. So I think that is a suggestion that she will be more heavily involved in the events of Blood and Cheese than it is originally let on to think in Fire and Blood.
And no war so bloody as a war between dragons.
In contrast, this is probably one of the more spectacular things we will see this season. However, I will give a little bit of pre-context to this, otherwise it's going to not make as much sense. So, following the events of Blood and Cheese, Aegon II became a lot more involved in the offensive against Team Black, given that he'd just lost his firstborn son and heir. He was pretty unhappy.
Fuck dignity.
So he went to his hand Otto, who we all know Otto Hightower. He kind of just sits about scheming, was sending ravens, trying to make alliances, basically trying to get other houses to do their work for them. And Aegon wasn't having that because he just wanted immediate revenge and vengeance. So he removed Otto Hightower as Hand of the King and instead gave it to Sir Criston Cole, the Kingmaker, and made him Hand of the King. And he had a much more aggressive approach to that, very much appeased Aegon's kind of outlook at this point, and that was to march northeast out of King's Landing through the seats of Rosby, Stokeworth, Duskendale, and eventually ending up at Rooks Rest. All of these had lords that were present at the Black Council that we saw in episode, it was either 9 or 10, I believe 10 of Season 1. And he marched through each one in turn, eventually ending up at Rooks Rest, taking them all for the Greens. However, the Lord of Rooks Rest, Lord Staunton, was forewarned of the Greens' arrival, I think because he heard of the events going on at Duskendale at the time, and was able to send a raven to Rhaenyra before they arrived, begging for aid and assistance. Now, Rhaenyra's two sons, Joffrey and Jace, both really wanted to fly over on Dragonback to assist Lord Staunton. However, given that Lucerys has, just been made a dragon snack, she didn't particularly want to let them do that. So she instead sent Rhaenys, the queen who never was, on the back of Meleys, the Red Queen, nearly messed that up, and she went over to assist Lord Staunton. And to begin with, doing really well. Criston had deployed some scorpions and archers, but Meleys was doing well. She was throwing knights up into the air. She was actually chewing on a horse, and then she heard a roar. And she realised that this was all one big trap, because Criston Cole had schemed with Aemond and Aegon II, and both had came back on Dragonback, Aegon on Sunfire, Aemond on Vhagar, and cornered Rhaenys and Meleys. However, to her credit, Rhaenys saw this, didn't think, I'll run back to Dragonstone, I'll be fine. She faced them down, flew at Aegon, and grappled with Sunfire. And honestly, went down in possibly the most badass way possible, because Vhagar had to swoop in and knock both dragons down to take out Meleys. Rhaenys, unfortunately, was burned to an absolute crisp, and Meleys was also left dead. However, Aegon II was burned so badly that his armor fused with his skin. And his dragon, the wing was ripped off. It had gashes in its throat. It was severely handicapped after that fight, and Aegon had to be addled on Milk of the Poppy to even survive. Aemond and Vhagar were just absolutely fine because, well, why not? But this did eventually lead to Aemond taking a much more active role in the defense of Team Green, as well, Aegon was just completely out for the count. That should give some pretty clear reasoning as to why I think this is going to be one of the more spectacular things that we will see this season. However, there is one theory in particular I did want to discuss, and that is Baela's potential involvement in the Battles of Rooks Rest. Now, in the book, Baela is not involved, or at least it's not accounted that she's involved, as obviously the nature of Fire and Blood being written, it's not going to include everything. However, in Fire and Blood, Baela is not involved. Anyway, so in the shots of the trailer, however, there are several shots of her on Dragonback, presumably screaming in reaction, or she's clearly being pained by something she's seeing. Now, there's very few things I think could elicit that kind of reaction. And one of which I will talk about later in this video. However, the death of Rhaenys could certainly be one. And another thing I did see was someone clipped together two different points of the House of the Dragon trailers. One of Criston Cole and Green Forces running into some woods, and one of Baela on Moondancer flying over some woods. Now, this could be pure coincidence. However, what I think is possible is that Baela sees the death of Rhaenys and charges at Criston and a host of Greens running away into the woods in an attempt to at least try and pay them back to some extent. Now, this could potentially make sense, as with Meleys, Rhaenys, and Aegon and Sunfire falling to the ground, I think Aemond and Vhagar would be suitably distracted to go down and try and check in on what's happened to his brother and his brother's dragon. Also, if Rhaenys is also dead, it's the same with Meleys. So this could give Baela a window to attempt to try and kill Criston Cole. I don't think it will be successful because, let's just say, Criston Cole has a different fate in the books. But I think this would be a really, really welcome addition. I would, for one, would really enjoy seeing it because it added another emotional layer to seeing the death of Rhaenys in House of the Dragon Season 2, and it's a change I'm very, very open for, and I'm very excited to see if this actually is the case, or if it isn't, what is Baela screaming at?
I swear toward the Queen.
Now, you may remember at the end of Season 1, we're introduced to two new members of the Kingsguard, Sir Erryk and Sir Arryk Cargill. Now, what's notable about these two is, first, they're twins in the Kingsguard, which is pretty cool in itself, and the second is that they're on opposing sides of the war, with Sir Arryk being on Team Black side and Sir Erryk being on Team Green side. Now, again, following the events of Blood and Cheese, another plan that Aegon lays into fruition is sending Sir Erryk Cargill over to Dragonstone to impersonate Sir Arryk and essentially attempt to assassinate Rhaenyra. You can imagine the scandal, supposedly Rhaenyra's Kingsguard slaying her in her quarters or something along the lines. However, it doesn't quite go to plan, as the first person that Sir Erryk meets on Dragonstone when trying to sneak into the castle is his brother, Sir Arryk, and the two fatally fight each other to the death. This gets interesting, however, because we actually have two different accounts of how this fight happens in Fire and Blood, and I'm interested to see which one they will choose to adapt into the show. Now, I'm pretty sure the first one will be the one that's adapted, but still, I figured I'd discuss both and theorize. Now, the first one states that they dueled for hours, fighting and eventually mortally wounding each other and saying how much they cared for each other and how they were sorry and all that. And it's quite a dramatic, emotional fight that I really hope is what we do see, because just having them fight in 2 seconds and having it be over would be boring, and that is where the second account comes in that suggests that they mortally wound each other within seconds, curse each other as traitors, and then bleed out and die. I myself am much more of an advocate for a more drawn out fight which ends emotionally as opposed to just traitor, bleh. So I'm pretty sure we're going to get the first one, however I figured I'd still discuss both.
There are also unclaimed dragons.
For a show named House of the Dragon, how can we make Season 2 better than the first? Well, more dragons, and that's exactly what the Dragonseeds will give us. Now, following the Battle of Rooks Rest, Jacaerys Velaryon believes that they need more Dragon Riders allied with Team Black following the death of Rhaenys, so they start looking for Dragonseeds. Dragonseeds typically were Targaryen bastards that could bond with dragons. Whether or not all of these supposed Dragonseeds are actually Targaryen or Valyrian bastards, we don't know. However, they are as follows: Hugh Hammer, who will bond with Vermithor, who was, I believe, the dragon of the old King Jaehaerys; Ulf the White, who will bond with Silverwing, the dragon of the late Queen Alysanne; Addam of Hull, who will bond with Seasmoke, the former dragon of Laenor Velaryon; and Nettles with a wild dragon called Sheepsteel. There are a couple of other contenders here who do die in the attempt of trying to bond with dragons, however I've chosen not to mention them here as I don't know if the show will actually include them or not. One Dragonseed in particular that I am interested in seeing, however, is Sir Addam of Hull, who will be legitimised as Sir Addam Velaryon. Now, that's the exact point that I'm interested about, is that we don't really know his father in Fire and Blood, so I'm interested in the route the show will take. There are essentially three that are provided in Fire and Blood. One is that he is a bastard of Sir Laenor Velaryon, which I think is pretty much impossible in the show, as it's been well established that Laenor is not interested in women and is interested in the company of men. So it's very, very unlikely that he's side a bastard. The second theory is that it is Lord Corlys Velaryon, which again is possible, but however, given the strong relationship between Corlys and Rhaenys, I'm unsure of how they will approach that. It could potentially be a bastard that he maybe sired before Rhaenys. However, I'm unsure of how the timeline would work with that. And the third is that he's not actually anything to do with House Velaryon, but gets legitimized as a Velaryon bastard anyway. So I'm interested to see the route the show's going to go down with that. The other dragon seed that I'm interested in seeing is Nettles, and the only reason I mention Nettles here is because there's been a lot of rumors regarding whether or not she'll actually be involved in the show. Nettles does have a more prominent role. I don't think we will really see until the next season of House of the Dragon, so I think it would be a really huge loss to have her cut from this season, and I personally hope they don't do that. However, again, this is just rumors and speculation. I don't actually know whether Nettles has been cut or not. That's just what I heard a couple of months ago circulating. However, again, the main thing I am interested here is the true parentage of Addam of Hull, as that will have to be explored in one alley or another. But yeah, I do hope that Nettles does make it into the show.
The Riverlands are essential, Your Grace.
Here again, I'll have to do a little bit of jumping to and fro. So at the beginning of the Dance of the Dragons, Daemon Targaryen flies to Harrenhal and captures it bloodlessly, which is a huge victory for the Blacks, and essentially becomes a rallying point for them in the Riverlands. Now, later on in the war, Daemon eventually leaves to go do something that I will talk about later in this video. However, that leaves Harrenhal abandoned, and Aemond takes it, thinking he will catch Daemon. Unfortunately, does not, and ends up taking Harrenhal for himself. Now, where this becomes interesting is the inclusion of a rather mystical character known as Alice Rivers. Now, what's interesting about Alice Rivers is we don't really know anything about her definitively, and she doesn't have a lot of time in the book. However, she does play quite an influential role. Now, Alice is supposedly a bastard of Lionel Strong, the father of Harwin and Larys Strong. Is supposedly a bastard of House Strong. Is supposedly around 40 and is a wet nurse. However, she looks younger than her years and is supposedly rather attractive and catches the eye of none other than Aemond Targaryen, who, as Alice River claims, leaves a dragon bastard in her belly. So this is something that I will be interested to see, because Alice Rivers has been confirmed to be appearing in Season 2 of House of the Dragon. So I'm very interested to see what exactly we're going to see happen with Alice Rivers, as she's a very mysterious point of contention in Fire and Blood.
Dragons can fly faster than ravens.
Now, you may remember earlier in the video when I was talking about the Battle of Rooks Rest, I mentioned that Otto, when he was Hand, was sending ravens for alliances to try and get more support for Team Green. Now, this is where one of the ravens actually gets somewhere, and that was a raven that was sent to the Triarchy in the Free Cities. Now, the Triarchy are obviously not friendly with Daemon at all, as they went to war with him over the Step Zones when Daemon was back with House Velaryon, so they're not really friendly with Team Black. So Otto was trying to play with that, and he eventually got them to agree to sail to King's Landing through the Gullet. Now, obviously, this was Otto was no longer Hand. This was after the Battle of Rooks Rest, so some time had passed here. However, I am going to do a little bit more of jumping around to kind of fully explain the context. Now, as they were sailing towards the Gullet, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon decided that his two youngest brothers, Aegon and Viserys, should be sent to Pentos, basically to keep them out of the way of the dance, so no more of Rhaenyra's children will die. And they depart on a ship that ends up going through the Gullet at the same time that the Triarchy arrives, so the ship gets attacked. Aegon, the eldest of the two brothers, manages to fly away on his small dragon back to Dragonstone, which is luckily just a small flight, and warn them of what's going on. Jace then, on his dragon, goes with a few of the Dragonseeds and a bunch of the Velaryon forces to fight down the Triarchy and try and get his youngest brother, Viserys, back from them. The fight is pretty wild, and honestly, it's a bit of a loss for both sides, as Jace's dragon Vermax flies too low to the sea, ends up getting hit down. It's not entirely clear how the dragon ends up in the sea, but it does, and it gets pinned down by archers and killed. Jace unfortunately falls off whilst trying to find his brother and is killed by crossbowmen, and 33% of the Velaryon fleet is decimated by the Triarchy. Granted, the Triarchy lose a lot in return, however, this is a pretty heavy loss for both sides. Now, I should say it's not entirely clear if we will be getting the Battle of the Gullet this season. I personally think it is likely, based on where I think this season is going to end, which will be point number 8. But yeah, it's not entirely clear. I think it's quite likely, based mainly off of the fact that Jace is in a lot more of the footage from the trailers and has been pushed a little bit more on the marketing side. Harry Collett, who plays Jace, has been quite present in marketing for the show, so I think it is likely that we're going to get a build-up of showing more of Jace being quite active in the Dance of the Dragon. However, I think ultimately he will die at the end. But yeah, that's just my theory. I think that we will be seeing the Battle of the Gullet episode. However, it is not in any way confirmed. I think the rest of the points I've mentioned here are incredibly likely. I think the Battle of the Gullet is kind of, and this last point is where it gets a little bit kind of more divisive on whether or not we will see it this season.
Surround King's Landing with the dragons.
This is where I think Season 2 will end, with Rhaenyra and Daemon taking King's Landing and Rhaenyra ascending the Iron Throne. But how do we get here? Now, you may recall when I was talking about Harrenhal, I mentioned that Daemon left for an undisclosed reason. Now, this is the reason. Basically, Rhaenyra and Daemon plotted to have Harrenhal abandoned, so therefore Aemon and Criston Cole would march towards it, thinking either they'd catch Daemon leaving, or they'd be able to take the castle, leaving King's Landing essentially defenseless, because Aegon is addled on milk with the poppy, and his dragon is in no fit state to be ridden regardless, and Helaena has been driven mad with grief, so therefore can't mount Sunfire and defend on Dragonback. Therefore, it's ripe for the taking, so Rhaenyra and Syrax and Daemon and Caraxes will fly down onto the city. Daemon will use his connections within the City Watch to ensure that the Blacks can enter the fortress with no kind of main issue, and the entire Green Council will submit to Rhaenyra. However, there is a small exception to that, because Larys Strong, the Master of Whisperers, and Aegon II, along with a couple of his children, mysteriously disappear with seemingly no trace. However, the rest of the council is successfully apprehended and does surrender, with Alicent being the only one who is spared, with the rest being handed to torturers, with the exception of Otto Hightower, who is executed for treason, and then Rhaenyra will ascend the throne, and that is where I think Season 2 will end. That, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, are 8 things that we can expect to see in House of the Dragon Season 2. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I will say as well, not all of these things will necessarily happen in Season 2. I think the last 2 are the most subjective as to whether or not they will be left to Season 3 or not. It is my opinion that all of these will in fact happen in Season 2 of House of the Dragon. However, do not take my word for gospel. Also, if you're a Fire and Blood fan and you think, Bael got something wrong in this video, please do let me know in the comments. I'll happily look back into it. And yeah, this is my first video of this kind of format, so if you have any feedback of where I can improve, please do let me know, because I do want to try and do a little bit more of this content on YouTube. I don't want to just be known for reactions. Whilst they are fun and enjoyable, I want to try and expand in my horizons and do a little bit of other kind of areas of content, especially regarding lore, as that's always been something I've been, you know, quite passionate about. So yeah, do let me know how you think I did in this video. If there's anything that you think I got wrong, do drop that as well, along with any feedback. But yeah, I will be covering House of the Dragon Season 2 on this channel. I will be doing reactions that will be attempted to release every Monday, which will cover reactions to the episode as well as a discussion after about the episode itself, where we think things could go. And both me and my co-host Kels have read Fire and Blood, so we will have kind of kind of insider knowledge on where the show probably will be going, as we know the source material both quite well. But ladies and gentlemen, that will be all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you're new and clicking that like button. But that is all. I will see you in the next video.